Everyone, from hardcore cinephiles to general movie lovers, knows about one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Stanley Kubrick. His ability to merge his unconventional framing techniques to give us complex storylines with social satire is worthy of heavy discussion. Stanley Kubrick's works are a blast to watch and intriguing to obsess over. The visual frames, the controversial material of his films, and the stunning effects truly made Kubrick one of the many acclaimed filmmakers. He's literally one of the pioneers of the golden age of Hollywood. Given that he's a perfectionist, Kubrick is notorious for meticulously working on his projects and reshooting the same scene over and over again until he's satisfied with it. While this did earn him the reputation of being hard to work with, that doesn't change the fact that he was a brilliant filmmaker and his movies are considered to be among the finest ever made. So today, we will be looking into all of his life's work and delve deep into why they are fantastic to watch. Further, we explain why movie lovers who aren't familiar with his work should definitely try out these films. So join us as we go on this much-awaited journey. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The Shining, 1980, 8.4. Here's Johnny. I'm sure all of us think of the same scene whenever we hear this phrase. And why wouldn't we? The Shining is one of the most iconic works out of Kubrick's entire filmography. This psychological horror film starring Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Danny Lloyd, and Scatman Crothers has been the nightmare fuel for a lot of us who came across this movie at a particularly young age. The movie is based on Stephen King's novel, following a recovering alcoholic come aspiring novelist who takes his wife and son with him to a haunted resort hotel as a winter caretaker. What was supposed to be an easy job for Jack Torrance soon took a sinister turn as the resort slowly started to distort his mind. Ghostly apparitions slowly lured Jack to dip his toes into his alcoholic tendencies, and with madness on the way, things take a bad turn for Wendy and Danny, who are sequestered inside the resort with a madman. My favorite scene from this movie has to be when he breaks down the door. While a lot of people saw Shelley Duvall as a bad actress because of her expressions at that moment, I think she encapsulates the sheer terror, despair, and hopelessness the way anyone else in her shoes would have. Would you look prim and proper if a crazy man was breaking down the door that was keeping you safe from him? I don't think so. The main theme of this movie is the descent into madness due to the desensitization that Jack feels while isolated there. Although Stephen King himself had made it abundantly clear that the movie was not up to his satisfaction, as it left a lot unspoken, I think that's where the charm lies. We know the horrors of the Overlook Hotel and the horrors of Jack's mind itself. The history that led to this descent doesn't really matter. The madness and the fear it perpetuates is at the most primal level. The huge, ominous hotel, with its many ghosts and excessively bloody elevators, will surely leave your spine tingling from fear. Jack Nicholson went all out for this movie, and even now, when I see Jack Nicholson in any other film, I keep thinking of his performance in The Shining. This is the greatest horror film that's out there, and if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. Paths of Glory, 1957, 8.4. Stanley Kubrick has made it evident in his filmography that he is very much an anti-war proponent. So, does it surprise anyone that one of his most popular films happens to be an anti-war film? Based on the novel written by Humphrey Cobb, Paths of Glory takes place in 1916, during World War I. Here, we follow French Colonel Dax, who was asked to attack the Anthill, a well-defended German position, by Brigadier General Paul Moreau. The Brigadier General knew that the attack would be quite the challenge, but when the French Major General Georges Brulard ordered him, promising a promotion, he commanded Dax to carry on the advancement. Dax protests against the attack, but he's forced to lead the first wave into no man's land under heavy fire. The second team that was supposed to follow after refuses to leave the trenches, seeing the evident defeat, and Moreau asks the artillery to fire on the soldiers in the trenches to force them out. The artillery commander refuses to fire without a written order, and now Moreau decides to court-martial 100 soldiers on the grounds of cowardice to to deflect the blame for the attack. This movie gives us a good look at the human psyche, especially how greed transcends everything, even when war is happening. Everyone in the story that we follow, the characters, are selfish in their own way, except for Dax. When Brulard realized that Dax was genuine about his sentiments, he insulted Dax's idealism, which feels like a slap to all our faces. Dax is not wrong in his position, but seeing him suffer just because he's trying to do what's right feels way too real and relatable. Kirk Douglas plays the role of Colonel Dax, and I promise you, when he is on screen, you cannot look away. His presence demands all of your attention, and he shows off his acting chops skillfully by portraying such a complex character. You can understand the sincerity behind Dax's words as he fights against the higher-ups to treat his men as more than just cattle for the slaughterhouse. Dr. Strangelove, 1964. 8.3. Kubrick has often portrayed dark aspects of society in his films. However, that doesn't mean he does not have a sense of humor. His one film in which the genre itself is comedy is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. As you may or may not have guessed from the title, this film is going to be an inherently political one. So in this film, Kubrick satirized the Cold War hysteria where everyone was sure they'd get a nuclear bomb dropped on them. In this film, we follow Brigadier General Jack D. Ripper, who has completely lost his mind. He believes that the Soviets have been putting fluoride in American water to ruin the American body fluids. Believing that, he decided to start off the wing attack Plan R, which resulted in B-52 bombers flying out armed with thermonuclear bombs. Lionel Mandrake, the exchange officer, has to figure out how to stop Ripper in the next 2 hours just to prevent the worst-case scenario from happening. What follows is the most hilarious, mind-bending adventure with clever wordplay as everything Lionel Mandrake tries to do falls apart, bringing the doomsday closer to them by the minute. With clever innuendos, Kubrick gave us the most horrifying and bleak picture of the Cold War, laughing at the incompetence of the world leaders while their split-second decisions affected the entire world. George C. Scott, Peter Sellers, Sterling Hayden, and Slim Pickens did a fantastic job portraying the absolutely ludicrous situation, giving us in the audience a story worth remembering. 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, 8.3. The biggest reason why anyone should watch 2001, A Space Odyssey has to be because of how it changed the game when it comes to describing space travel. Even the OG novel is a well-known landmark in the science fiction genre, and aptly so. 2001 starts off with the dawn of man. The first black monolith shows up out of nowhere and passes on the knowledge of how to use the tools to the apes. Along with it, a new tendency to commit violence also shows up. The depiction of this first contact sequence is shot in an old-fashioned slow-motion montage where the apes learn to use bones and sticks as weapons and ultimately kill the ape tribe that took their waterhole. This sequence in itself is a visual masterpiece. It's crafted so beautifully that even though the impending sense of doom is there as the apes raise the bones, when the first strike lands, you feel your heart drop in a way. After this, we follow the scientist Dr. Floyd, who is traveling to the moon, where yet another monolith was found. Kubrick somehow manages to predict that Russia and America would be competing against each other even when it comes to space cooperation, and that adds another layer to the way Dr. Floyd and his colleagues deal with the presence of this monolith on the surface of the moon. The monolith is eventually exposed to sunlight, which leads to it beaming a signal to Jupiter. Seeing that, a huge modular was built, named Discovery 1, and it was sent for a trip to Jupiter. 2 astronauts are awake during this entire mission, while the rest of the crew is asleep, and the computer HAL 9000 is the one running the ship. Yes, HAL 9000 is the earliest depiction of AI, and the way Kubrick portrayed it is uncannily similar to how AI works now. Kubrick questions the relationship humans share with technology, and the main antagonist of this film happens to be HAL. He, like every other robot we've seen since, is willing to sacrifice everyone if it means he'll be able to complete his mission. HAL is willing to kill all the crew members and even lock Dave, the hero of the film, out of the ship. However, the funniest moment has to be when Hal is dying, but he begs for help even while maintaining a composed manner. The entire film is divided into 4 narrative segments, and each of them is like a separate story in their own accord. The cinematography, the scenes chosen, the colors used, everything plays a huge role in making this a mesmerizing story to watch unfold. A Clockwork Orange, 1972, 8.2. If you're a fan of psychological horror films, then surely you must have seen A Clockwork Orange, based on the novel written by Anthony Burgess. This film follows Alex, played by Malcolm McDowell. While he's charismatic and has an interest in classical music, he's also an antisocial delinquent who enjoys stealing, ultra-violence, and committing rape. He leads this group of thugs, who he calls droogs, the Russian word for friend. As the film progresses, we watch the horrific crime spree that Alex and his droogs go on, which eventually leads to his capture. Once he's taken in, he's forced to go through rehabilitation by the Ludovico technique, the experimental psychological conditioning technique that was promoted by the Minister of the Interior. Pretty much most of the film is narrated by Alex, which gives us a look into his thought process, which is twisted and dehumanizing to say the least. When the movie came out, the biggest criticism it faced was whether or not the movie was condoning the actions of this particular character, and that debate is still prevalent to this day. This movie is extremely visceral to watch, and the way it tackles the philosophical undertones with novelistic insights is genuinely beautiful to watch. The way Kubrick managed to tackle the youth culture and perpetual violence of this world is beautiful. The masterful blend of societal conditioning as well as adolescent ignorance is genuinely frightening to watch. You can never describe A Clockwork Orange with just one word, as this work is so unique, it encompasses several genres. Full Metal Jacket, 1987, 8.2. My own favorite Stanley Kubrick film has to be Full Metal Jacket. The way the movie depicts the psychological horrors of war is just amazing. Now, I know a lot of Kubrick fans feel like the first half of the film works as a Kubrick film, while the second half does not. I would beg to differ. Based on Gustav Hasford's autobiographical novel titled The Short Timers, this movie follows a platoon of U.S. Marines as they go through their boot camp training at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island in South Carolina. We follow Private J.T. Davis and Leonard Lawrence. While Davis gets the nickname Joker by the Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, Lawrence gets the nickname Gomer Pyle. Now, Lawrence is slightly cognitively challenged. He has a hard time following the rules and the work that he needs to do. Gunnery Sergeant Hartman finds Lawrence's footlocker open during a routine inspection, and in it, there's a jelly donut. Seeing that, Hartman decides to punish the entire platoon collectively for every mistake Lawrence makes. As you can imagine, this puts him on the hit list of all of his squad members, and the next night, Lawrence is hazed by the recruits. They cover him with a blanket and hold him down while everyone takes turns hitting him. Even though at first Davis wanted nothing to do with it, he eventually joined in, which made him question himself to a degree. Since this hazing ritual, a distinct change in Lawrence was noticed. He did amazingly at marksmanship, which made Hartman happy, but Davis noticed that Lawrence would often speak with his rifle like it was a real person. While it is true that Hartman insisted that the rifle would be their everything while they were in training, Davis knew that Lawrence's behavior was becoming more and more erratic and concerning. Eventually, all the recruits graduate, and what do you know, Davis finds Lawrence in the barracks latrine loading his service rifle. Except this time, it was not dummy rounds, it was live bullets. Lawrence suffers a full-on mental breakdown as he starts screaming the rifleman's creed and executes the drill commands. Davis knows he has live rounds and tries to get the rifle away from him, and the commotion that follows is loud enough to wake Hartman up. Hartman commands Lawrence to give him the rifle, but Lawrence is far gone. He shoots Hartman and then kills himself, shocking Davis to his core. Despite this extremely traumatizing event, Davis manages to become a sergeant a few years later and goes off to Vietnam to fight the war. But the war is nothing like the boot camp. His comrades die, one by one, and Davis watches it happen in front of his eyes without being able to do anything. The sniper that had been killing his comrades turns out to be a teenage girl. One of his squad members, named Rafterman, manages to wound her mortally. The girl begs the squad to kill her as they converge on her. Eventually, Davis is the one who has to mercy kill the young girl, leaving him more traumatized than ever. The movie ends with the Marines marching while singing Mickey Mouse March, which recontextualizes the song in a very gruesome way. The movie doesn't give us the closure that we were all hoping for, and that in itself is a closure. The most memorable performance of this movie has to be the one by Vincent D'Onofrio as Gomer Pyle. I can still see the horrifying expression on his face right before he shoots Hartman when I close my eyes. And it's been years since I watched this film. Full Metal Jacket would definitely leave you covered in cold sweat and questioning what all of these killings are for, something I feel we all think of whenever we hear about wars. Barry Lyndon, 1975, 8.1. Right after he finished A Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick started working on Barry Lyndon. At first, he wanted to create a biopic on Napoleon, but he backed away from the project when Dino De Laurentiis produced Waterloo and faced a huge loss. This led to Stanley Kubrick deciding to direct Barry Lyndon, which was set during the 7 Years' War, making use of the research that he had done for the Napoleon Project. The movie follows the life of an Anglo-Irish rogue who climbs up the social ladder by marrying a rich widow. Say what you want about it, but you have to admit this movie is an extremely beautifully shot film. Despite running for 3 hours, this movie is extremely entertaining to watch. The main character we follow, played by Ryan O'Neal, is the most selfish, arrogant, and horrible person you can imagine as the central character. He's heavily infatuated with his cousin, and after he gets defeated in a duel, he runs around trying to survive by pledging his allegiance to several nations as well as militaries. The fact that the main guy of our movie is someone who genuinely does not care about anyone except himself is truly a sight to behold. There's something magnificent about watching a horrible character climb up the ladder as we, the audience, who know every detail of his horrible actions, pray for his downfall. Barry Lyndon also happens to be an anti-war film, but unlike the other anti-war films that Kubrick had made, this one follows the war from the perspective of a character we all do not like. So, as he faces troubles, it makes it easier for us to understand how the 7 Years' War affected everyone, and we also get to feel a bit of joy seeing Barry struggle. I do think the ending of the movie is rather apt, and while my heart cries for Lady Lyndon, I feel no sympathy for Barry. The Killing, 1956, 7.9. We've all heard about Pulp Fiction, right? Well, the movie Reservoir Dogs laid the groundwork for Pulp Fiction. And guess what served as an inspiration for Reservoir Dogs? Yep, that's right. It was Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. This neo-noir heist film spawned an entirely new subgenre. And this is one of the most entertaining and well-acclaimed Kubrick films out there. So, The Killing follows this con man named Johnny Clay, played by Sterling Hayden. He was recently released from prison, and he wanted to do a heist on the horse racetrack, hoping to earn around $2 million. Johnny soon gets in touch with 4 other men who would be more than happy to join the heist. Our main guy explained to them that 2 other men would join the heist, and while one of them would shoot the favored horse to create confusion, the other would be a wrestler who would create a scene at the bar, setting up a huge diversion. Although the plan is simple, things inadvertently start going wrong when things are set in motion. As Johnny manages to get the money, one by one, his crew members are either caught or killed, forcing Johnny to flee with the money along with his girlfriend. However, at the airport, the couple makes a silly mistake and are forced to check their bag in. More misfortune follows as a baggage cart driver swerves into the suitcase and the money spills out, scattering all over because of a propeller. Even though Johnny could probably make it if he decided to escape, he chooses to stay and accept his fate. Usually, heist movies have femme fatales, red herrings, and even a few climactic shootouts. However, when it comes to The Killing, the audience expectations are subverted very nicely. Kubrick crafted a masterful crime movie that will have you sitting on the edge of your seat the entire runtime. Spartacus, 1960, 7.9. While we usually affiliate Stanley Kubrick with his controversial films, Spartacus is quite different from that. This movie is just as iconic as the rest of his filmography, but it's more of a crowd pleaser. This movie follows Spartacus, a Thracian slave who refuses to be held down by his position as a slave. His ferociousness was noticed by Lentulus Batiatus, a Roman businessman who bought him for his gladiatorial school. There, Spartacus suffered through various abuses, but managed to survive the humiliation of refusing servitude to keep being his own self. He continued surviving in this terrible situation with Varinia, a serving woman he fell in love with. Eventually, Varinia was bought by Marcus Licinius Crassus, who wished to be the dictator of Rome. He also bought Spartacus to fight others until death. In this fight, Spartacus gets disarmed, but his opponent refuses to kill him in an act of defiance and instead attacks the Roman audience instead. Even though Marcus does kill the slave, the seed of defiance is sown deep in Spartacus's heart. The next day, when Varinia was sent away, Spartacus killed off Marcellus, who was taunting him for his affections. This starts off Spartacus's journey against the corrupt Roman Empire. Although usually, movies like this have themes of huge nationalism about them, this particular movie has themes of civil rights and political activism laced into its plot. This was because of Dalton Trumbo, the writer of the screenplay. While Stanley Kubrick is more of the master of ambiguity, Trumbo doesn't shy away from being boisterous with his messaging. This is perhaps why, as a Kubrick film, this ranks on the lower side of the spectrum. But that doesn't mean this movie does not deserve a watch. Stanley Kubrick brought the ancient Roman Empire to life, and the action scenes in this movie are just awesome. This movie is the one that catapulted Kirk Douglas into his movie star fame, so definitely give it a watch. Lolita, 1962, 7.5. Vladimir Nabokov's work with the same name has been a source of controversy for many, many years. So when Stanley Kubrick confirmed that he would be working on the adaptation of this novel, fans were definitely interested. Lolita is a film that discusses child sexual abuse from the perspective of the abuser. In this book, we have this British professor, Humbert, who ends up getting infatuated with a young girl in her early days of puberty named Dolores Hayes. Dolores's nickname is Lolita. Just to be with Lolita, Humbert marries her mother, only to become withdrawn from her when the girl is sent away to a summer camp. He wrote about Lolita and her beauty in his diary, which of course, Charlotte, Lolita's mom and Humbert's now wife, found. She becomes distraught after reading everything and runs out of the house only to be run over by a car, leaving Humbert to take care of Lolita. The relationship between the stepfather and stepdaughter soon goes down the worst possible route as they start off an amorous relationship. Humbert keeps being an overprotective father, hoping to keep Lolita away from the harsh world. However, eventually, Lolita goes missing, and Humbert has no way of figuring out where she is. 3 years later, Lolita sends Humbert a letter asking for money as she's now pregnant and married. Humbert tries to bring Lolita back to him, but she refuses, claiming she has been having an affair with her now husband for a really long time, making it clear to Humbert that he was not the only one. So eventually, Humbert tracks down Lolita's husband, shoots him dead, and dies in prison while awaiting his trial. The story of Lolita is a tragic one. No matter how tantalizing the cinematography can be, the movie that we're watching is from the perspective of the predator. Kubrick changed the story from a predatory relationship to a sympathetic relationship when he decided to cast the then 14-year-old Sue Lyon as Lolita, prominently making her a sex object. Nabokov himself later mentioned that while at first he thought Sue Lyon would be the perfect casting for Lolita, he thought Catherine de Mongeau would have been better suited for the role. Catherine is the one who played Zazie in Zazie and the Metro. She's 4 years younger than Sue Lyon, and while Sue Lyon definitely looked a bit mature for her age with the stylistic choices, Catherine de Mongeau would have been better suited for the role. Catherine de Mongeau, who at the time of filming was around 11, would have definitely hammered in the message of the movie quite well. The film's definitely an interesting watch as we delve deeper and deeper into Humbert's psyche, who is desperately trying to prove to himself and the audience that he is not at fault for his heinous actions. Eyes Wide Shut, 1999, 7.5. If you ever feel like you need to spice up your Christmas Eve with a lot of psychological and sexual tension, then Eyes Wide Shut would be the perfect film to watch. Starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, this 1999 film delves deep into the tumultuous state of mind of the couple in question. Tom Cruise plays the role of Dr. Bill Hartford, who lives in New York City with his wife Alice and daughter Helena. He's very well loved by his patients, so attending attending a Christmas party at his patient's residence is not something that's new for Hartford. However, at this party, a guest tries to seduce Alice, which ends up starting the entire downward spiral in Bill's life. So Bill knows that Alice is attractive, and he's not bothered by the fact that men often hit on her. He always believed that women were naturally more faithful than men, so he had nothing to worry about. However, Alice confesses to him that a year later, she was hit on by a naval officer, and she considered leaving Bill and Helena for the officer. This twists Bill's psyche just enough that even though he pushes away his patient's daughter, he actively goes and seeks out a prostitute in the hopes of lying with her. However, Bill stops himself after kissing the prostitute and takes his leave. Soon after, he learns of a masked orgy party which was going to be held in a mansion outside New York City. In his desperation and curiosity, Bill goes there and manages to get in with his mask on. However, he's soon found out, and the master of ceremonies warns him to stay quiet and not return. Bill feels guilty for his actions and returns home. There, he finds Alice laughing in her sleep. After waking up, Alice confesses that she dreamt of sleeping with the naval officer and many other men while Bill watched on, and that's why she was laughing. This pushed Bill more, and his downward spiral continued. Based on a novella named Dream Story written by Arthur Schnitzler, this movie depicts marital anxiety in a way that will grip your soul. The movie is a masterpiece when it comes to paranoia. Bill's character has what anyone would call toxic masculinity. Even though pretty much everything he spews is toxic, sexist jargon, you, as an audience member, cannot help but get sucked into this mysterious sexual society who are ready to shut outsiders up in heinous ways. We all know that Kubrick was infamous for his obsessive nature, but this movie in itself is about obsession. Kubrick passed away from a heart attack 6 days after showing the final cut of this film to Warner Brothers. In his words, this movie was his greatest contribution to the art of cinema. I think the fact that this film leaves us, the audience, with so many questions about ourselves is what makes this film art. If art doesn't make you question who you are and what you stand for, then is it truly art? Killer's Kiss, 1955, 6.6. Her soft mouth was the road to sin-smeared violence. With a tagline this tantalizing, you would think that this film would give us one of those stories where a girl kisses a guy, and now the guy is super obsessed with her, ready to go to any lengths to ensure he can have her. I mean, I can't be the only one who thought that, right? However, as it turns out, this story, despite its name, is quite different. Unlike the other films on his roster, where we follow unsympathetic characters and their eventual downfall, Killer's Kiss introduces us to characters everyone will care about. We have Jamie Smith playing the middleweight New York boxer who falls in love with Gloria Price, played by Irene Kane, who's a taxi dancer. Gloria and Davy live right across from one another, and they've been stealing glances at each other for a while. However, the first time they properly interacted was when Davy saw Gloria getting assaulted by her boss, Vincent Rapallo, played by Frank Silvera. He showed up at her place and luckily found her unharmed. From then on, the two end up in an emotional relationship, eventually deciding that they would run off together, leaving behind their lives. But some purely ill-timed events occur, and Davy ends up getting suspected of murdering his manager. Eventually, Davy manages to get his vengeance, and since he acts in self-defense, he's allowed to go free, giving us the happy ending that we've been waiting for. This barely 70-minute movie gives us a romance riddled with crime and violence in a way that I definitely didn't see coming, and for that reason, I quite like it. One of the biggest reasons why this movie is an outlier amongst Kubrick's entire filmography has to be because we get to follow two characters we can root for who have simply been dealt bad hands in life. With barely any budget, Kubrick managed to craft a beautiful, tragic story. However, if you watch this film without knowing who's in the director's chair, I'm sure you wouldn't think of it being Stanley Kubrick. The style of filming is very reminiscent of John Huston or Billy Wilder. It makes sense that as a new filmmaker, Stanley Kubrick was still trying to figure out his own style and following the current trends of the time to get his footing in Hollywood. And perhaps that's why there's a thematic and tonal similarity with Billy Wilder's works. Despite all of that, if you wish to watch a tragic love story in the crime noir genre, then this movie is the one for you. Fear and Desire, 1952, 5.3. The first film on his roster also happens to be his least known work. Starring Frank Silvera, Steve Colt, Kenneth Harp, and Paul Mazursky, Fear and Desire acts as a contrast to the times it was released. The film was released when the Korean War was going on, and American militarism was in full gear. This movie focuses on the missions and other exploits of 4 soldiers played by the actors when they go to this unnamed country. With a production team of 15 people, Stanley Kubrick made his directorial debut with this film at the Venice Film Festival. Although at the festival, this film was titled Shape of Fear. While, yes, none of the iconic cinematographic style of Stanley Kubrick is present in this movie, his debut is a ride on its own. You get to watch 4 young men struggling to survive a war, doing their best to follow commands while facing unexpected challenges. They traveled to a country they knew nothing about, except the fact that they had to kill the enemy general at the nearby base after crash landing on enemy territory. The horrors of war on the young men who are forced to fight on the front lines are depicted in the most tasteful yet shocking ways. I think the most memorable sequence of the movie has to be when the youngest soldier of the 4, Sidney, played by Paul Mazursky, loses his mind. The portrayal of the psychological torment of the young man is such a harrowing scene to watch. You really have to take a moment to get yourself together. If you're expecting some sort of subtlety about the cruelty of war, then Fear and Desire will definitely leave you disappointed, as there's nothing subtle here. Even if you're the most hardcore Stanley Kubrick fan to ever exist, you'll have to admit that compared to his later filmography, Fear and Desire really doesn't showcase his talents. You can't watch this movie and guess that Kubrick would end up giving us so many nuanced films in his later years. The experimental techniques that Kubrick is well known for are present in this film, but as it was his directorial debut, the talent is not fully formed. For any average viewer, this film might be a bit of a drag, as the pacing might come off a bit wonky. This movie is what set Stanley Kubrick on his journey to become one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and that definitely deserves a watch. Marvelous verdict. It's remarkable how illustrious Stanley Kubrick's film career has been over the years, leaving an imperishable legacy, inspiring and influencing generations of artists. The late, great Kubrick is an era-defining creator. From works that showcase his early flair to the more iconic and recognizable classics in cinema, these were our picks for the very best of Kubrick. Let us know about your thoughts and opinions on this stalwart of a filmmaker, and I'll catch you guys the next time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.